Hey, Motorman here. Listen, we're going to talk about something a little bit different this week. There's 3 techniques I've told you about: head and eyes, friction zone, little pressure on the rear brake. We're going to talk about not using that rear brake. So come on. So today we're going to talk about when you should not use the rear brake. Of course, when you're coming to a stop, you should use both brakes, front and rear brakes. Get in that habit, because though most of your braking force, I don't know, I'd say 85–90% is in that front brake, but the rear brake does help. So get in the habit of using both brakes when you come into a stop. However, the 3 techniques I tell you about all the time is head and eyes. Turn your head and eyes and look where you want to put that front tire, as I'm going to demonstrate right now. I'm going to turn my head and eyes. Look as far behind me as possible. Now, I was in the friction zone. That's the second technique. Proper use of the friction zone. Friction zone, if you don't know by now, is that area of clutch travel between completely open when you release it and completely closed. On most bikes, it's about 1 inch wide, and you're fluctuating the clutch within that inch, never letting it out all the way, never letting it in all the way. And of course, the third technique is put a little bit of pressure on the rear brake, and it helps to steady the bike when making low speed turns. But I remember when I went through the instructor course, the first day we were allowed to use the rear brake, and after that they said no more rear brake. So why would you do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, no rear brake here, by the way. None. One is it's going to save wear and tear on the brake and the clutch. There's not much wear and tear on either one when you're doing these exercises, as long as you give the bike a little cool down time. In other words, breeze it out after every few minutes of practice. If you got a bike with a dry clutch like BMW, some BMWs, and I think all Moto Guzzi's, you want to give it some more cool down time. So you should be able to do, if you got my Ride Like a Pro experience video, you should be able to do, after a while, every single exercise without touching that rear brake. That may mean you have to initially go a little bit slower. So here we go with a U-turn, no rear brake. That scraping noise you heard was just the kickstand. Doesn't mean anything. Just a warning, says don't go any further. You can go a little bit further, but not much, or you might lever a tire off the ground. But not using the rear brake will get you really, really good at your clutch and throttle. That coordination is of the utmost importance. So instead of using that rear brake, just use your clutch and throttle and your head and eyes. And you should be able to do every one of the exercises on my Ride Like a Pro video. They're set up, remember, at 24 feet. And when you could do that, then you'll be ready to try the same thing, except at 18 feet. But, you know, take it down little by little. So you don't want to start out with 18-foot turns and no brake. Start off with 24-foot turns, no brake. That will make you much better at coordinating the clutch and throttle, and it will show you also how little rear brake pressure you need. Remember, if you're doing these exercises and your bike tends to do this, like you're on and off that brake and the bike is jumping up and down, you're using way too much brake, and you're pumping the brake instead of putting light pressure on it. I can't tell you what light pressure is. It's just a feel that you have to develop. You don't have, if I said it was 8 pounds of pressure, you don't have a feeler gauge on your foot, so that wouldn't mean a thing to you. But here's turns right at about, I don't know, 8–10 miles an hour. No rear brake at all, because I'm pretty good with that clutch and throttle, and you should be as well. And the way to get good at it is to eliminate using that rear brake when practicing. Out on the street, you're going to make a U-turn. There might be a car coming up behind you. Go ahead and use that rear brake, because that's the last place you want to make a mistake, drop the bike, and have a car not paying attention, suddenly run you over while your bike is laying on the ground. But give it a try. You might be at that stage where you don't need it. And also, if you're practicing these techniques and suddenly your rear brake gets really mushy and then all of a sudden it disappears, that tells you, or should tell you, that you're using way too much pressure on the rear brake. If you wait just a few minutes, about 15 minutes, the rear brake will come back, but that means you've probably boiled the fluid. So if it were me and that happened to me, I would probably change that brake fluid, because once it boils, it's not going to be as effective, even though the brake will come back and you may think you have the exact same amount of brake force. Yeah, it's best to go ahead and just change the fluid, bleed those brakes, and you should do that. I think it's every 2 years. Harley recommends anyway. Now, of course, if you're going to be riding in competition, you got to use the rear brake, because speed is important. You're going to have to accelerate, brake hard, and then make your turns, and then accelerate hard out of the exercise to the next exercise and hit the brake. So this is just for practicing. You're spending, I don't know, 30 minutes at least a week. You should be practicing this stuff. Go ahead and try it. No rear brake.